got married that we're moving back to Newfoundland. So I'm one of the fellows that followed my wife back to Newfoundland, and I really had no choice. So it's why I'm here. I only got here about 5 weeks ago from driving from Vancouver. We left Vancouver in the middle of July and drove all the way to Newfoundland. This is my older son, Lucas, when we were in Quebec City. And when I think about security, and I was thinking about the talk, and I said, you know, this is the perfect photo. Thinking about security and oh my God. So, a little bit about my background. I started cutting code a long time ago. I'll be 50 this year. And there was a point when I did a bunch of stuff in Microsoft technology. I was certified as a Microsoft professional, but this was still 15 years ago. Thinking about how your information does disappear, is I needed to contact Microsoft to resurrect some of my certifications, and they had no record of me. I actually had to contact one of their partners to resurrect my information so I could figure out what my Microsoft professional ID was, so I could reestablish my Microsoft. So, you know, things do go away in some situations. I've spent a lot of time also working in open source. So recently I did a gig with Mozilla where we were doing some standard stuff for open badges, and I could get into that in a different thing. But essentially my career has spanned as much proprietary solutions as it has open source. I'd rather work in the open source community, but that's not always possible when you're sort of, I'm a career consultant from a solution architecture perspective. So that's where this sort of came up. When I got into St. John's, I was starting to think, oh, lightning talk, great, let's make a proposal. Looked at last year's talk, so I'm going to start ramping it up here a little bit because I got 20 minutes, it's supposed to be lightning fast. So I looked at defense in depth, and somebody did a talk last year about defense in depth as an emerging paradigm, and I go, hang on a second, it's not an emerging paradigm, we've been doing this for a long time, but I do really appreciate from a solution architecture perspective, and when I say solution architecture, it means that I'm working on a specific project within an organization to get something done. So I have a solution. So I'm not an enterprise architect. I won't look at it from the large realm of architecture. I consider myself partially security. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there, but mostly the point I'm trying to make here is about the solution architect role within baking a solution into an existing organization. So that's where when I came across defense in depth, for me it makes a lot of sense of trying to get a solution done, because it's hard. If you're going to be, so here's a quick agenda description. I'm going to do a quick description of defense in depth, how I see it. Again, stress the solution architect perspective, and then look at some of the issues and getting to finished. So when I continue, so here's just a quick review of defense in depth. And the idea being is that from the core where your data is, and then you work out from there. So you have your data, wherever that happens to be stored on whatever device, you're going to have some sort of application that sits around that. Each of the layers are going to have some way of securing that layer. And they can work independently, sometimes they work together, but from a perspective of defense in depth, the depth comes on all the different layers and how that's implemented and how the different technologies can implement security. I think the one that's most interesting here is also the bottom blue box, which is policies, procedures, and awareness. And this is where I find, looking at things from a defense in depth perspective, I'll talk a little bit more about this, within all the groups that are responsible for all the different layers, starts to have a real positive impact on how you're doing security. So let's look at, so I kind of look at it as two different perspectives, where I see on, and I tried to color code these the same as what was here, but what we have here is two perspectives. I see that if you look on the left-hand side, is just a server, and there's a bunch of security stuff that can go on the server, from the data, the application, and the operating system, and then how it connects to the network, right? So that's how each server essentially has a bunch of layers on it. And then when you look at it from the whole network, and this is trying to be a diagram of a corporate network, is you got some perimeter stuff, you're going to have a DMZ, you're going to have a corporate network. This is sort of a model that's existed for a long time. So, you know, for the defense in depth, I see more as sort of a naming that's happened for practices that have been going on for a long time. What I'm trying to show here is that you got things, the triangles will be directory services, you're going to have databases, or most of the time going to be in the corporate network. You're going to have to get play through some firewalls. There's going to be a bunch of technology there. You know, you're listening to these people, and there's a lot of great technology, a lot of really good, you know, people who work in each of their respective areas. But the main point is that there's a lot of different areas in which people are doing work. So your database administrators are responsible for your databases and usually responsible for locking down on the roles and some of the security of the databases. You're going to have your network, you're going to have your perimeter layer. There might be a separate group that works up in the perimeter. So there's a whole bunch of different groups that are working in a sort of a defense and depth perspective. So when I look at it even further, so this is more of your generic looking mid-size to enterprise-size corporate network as just sort of a put-together diagram to look at mostly the complexity of it all. So you're going to have a perimeter, and in fact you'll find that each of those areas are probably going to have some change going on within them all the time. So I was just at a client with a major insurance provider. They were investigating the whole idea of a web application firewall. That was the change in the perimeter. That was the major initiative in there. In the demilitarized zone, they had a whole identity management initiative underway. They were creating actual network zones for their identity management. They had a different demilitarized zone for different things, and there was just all that sort of stuff that was going on. Again, the corporate network, you know, again, I think the thing that I find interesting is that in general, the databases are in the corporate network, and some things need to start pushing those into different zones. Then we can turn around and we start looking at the vendors and the partners that come along, and you have to partner with them, and you may be sort of somehow coming out with a single sign-on or something like that. And then after all that, back to the blue boxes, you're going to have a whole bunch of things like data governance, security, privacy standards, content access, business continuity, and disaster recovery. It's a complicated environment. So me coming into that as a solution architect is how do I get, and the most recent project was a SharePoint installation. Over 2 million users were targeted at the end. Some really important private information was going to be there. How do we introduce a SharePoint environment from a security perspective into an existing environment? Not only that, the people that are in that environment are going to be very entrenched in their technology. Like if you say, well, can you just, you know, move the directory out into the DMZ? Yeah, it's a no-brainer, right? Like, they're not going to allow any kind of change or movement in general unless the work's done, the homework's done, and you can make a really good argument for why you're going to have to make this change. So the way I approach it is it's got to be it's an approach where you're thinking about how am I going to shepherd the decisions along. I mean, this is sort of from a solution architecture or an enterprise architecture. There's a lot of frameworks and a lot of sort of approaches that you can use to shepherd decisions along. But the concise thing, and this is where I found that it's sort of tied back into steak, in the sense that you really need to come up with a concise problem statement. And as an example of that, is that we were dealing, well, this one is the directories. They moved all the directories into the corporate network. They didn't want to have any of the directories out of the DMZ, and you know they had a bunch of good reasons for doing that. And it was, you know, but we needed access to some sort of directory because we needed service accounts, right? You can't start up a database, or you can't start something up unless you have some sort of account. So we had to start negotiating, moving, even if it was just sort of a replicant and some trust set up. So we had to get really concise about exactly what it was that we were trying to do. We had the same issue with some private information, and we wanted to move the database out into the DMZ, and they were like, the database, no way, you know, corporate's not going to allow that. And we started to really poke at it, and the point was that we were just moving the database in there to host content for SharePoint. So as soon as we got to the point that we were talking about what the concise problem was, it was much easier for all the players to start letting it happen and sort of somewhat doing the change management side. So it became really important to identify the technical stakeholders in that process. So if I was to go back, and you could look here, there's a lot of technical stakeholders, right? You're going to have, in this diagram, you've probably got at least 7 different groups. And these groups don't necessarily even talk to each other on a regular basis. Maybe once a year, maybe twice a year, maybe there's some rift happen between them and they actually ignore each other on purpose now. So, I mean, this, again, I'm talking about in the larger corporate environments where politics and personalities start to kick in. You also need to figure out who the approvers and reviewers are. Like, we were baking some architectural decisions along, and we knew that we had booked 2 months from now, the major enterprise group with some of the senior management is going to give approval for the decisions for the change that we're trying to do. And so we sort of said, well, from an approvers and reviewers have a relationship with its technical stakeholders. No approver is going to give the thumbs up unless their team of technical people say yes first. That's usually how they're going to enter into that meeting. But we were running down this path, and somebody said, we got this taxonomy issue because we're doing search. Search was a part of it. We needed to optimize the taxonomy for the organization. And I was wondering down this, and I should probably follow up on this. And this was literally 2 weeks before we were supposed to propose it to the group. I came across the data governance group that could veto any decision. And I didn't even know they existed because nobody told me. I'm an external consultant coming in. Data governance, because the job role was just created a few weeks before. So the corporate environment wasn't really adjusted yet to this new, but they were given a lot of power, and they had a bunch of reasons for that because of the privacy of information. But anyways, I needed to figure that out, and I needed to engage their technical stakeholders and get their approval on a decision before. Essentially, by the time we actually get to making a recommendation to the senior group, we already had sign-off. Right? And that's got to be across the organization, back to all those groups. So if there's a sleeper group in here that you don't know about that could potentially veto your decision, you need to know that when you're trying to start doing, particularly in the security realm, right? Particularly when you're looking at defense and or some way where you're having to make change. And I'm just trying to provide a template for going through that. So once you have the big thing is a concise problem statement and a comprehensive set of options, because that's going to give you buy-in from the different groups, right? Because you need to engage a conversation. So it's a really collaborative effort to try and make these kind of changes in a complicated technical environment and iterate from there. Talk to somebody, go back to the group, have group meetings, work really diligently at trying to get those decisions. Make a really strong recommendation to the approvers and be thorough. And you should make it through. Right? But that doesn't always happen. I mean, I was in one situation where, one of the senior people, did you consider this? And I go, I didn't even know it existed. Why didn't anybody tell me about this? And that was after going through this sort of environment. So, things happen. Make sure that you're looking at related systems and issues also. Like as I was saying, any organization is going to be in change. Each group's going to have major initiatives that they got going on for the year. And then also, if you can bake into your decision, as you sort of are trying to move any future considerations that may be there. That'll help you get through. So some examples I've already sort of touched on. The directory location one was interesting. There was a lot of pushback on that one because there's no way, you're not moving our directories. You just get, what are you, some outside consultant, you want to put a SharePoint, Microsoft product in here and you want us to move directories? As soon as we started to say, well, this is only for service accounts, it shifted. Right? Same thing with data location, a lot of data privacy and personal information. A lot of pushback as soon as you said, well, we can't just stand up a SharePoint server without a database in the same network zone. And so they said as soon as they realized it was just for content, everything relaxed. So it's often you'll find that there's a reaction to what you're suggesting, but you really need to start asking the right questions and getting into that stuff. Network segment, there's an interesting one there. When you get into the larger, more complex, have your database servers on the same network segment as your business logic servers and those sorts of things. All of these things are going to come up as decisions. This is not an exhaustive list by any means of the sort of stuff that you can have. And then be very mindful of legacies. Now those legacies may be legacy applications, honor them, but there may be legacy decisions that were made and they architected it in this way for a whole bunch of really good reasons. And you need to find out what those good reasons are. And if you can take it through this kind of a process, hopefully you can change this kind of environment where you're improving on each of those pieces to give a greater sort of defense in depth approach. And that's my lightning talk. If you need to contact me, there's information. I'm working with ZIT now, if you're interested. I'm very grateful. I've flown into the city, and within a couple months, they were gracious enough to take a risk with me, and just want to thank St. John's in general for welcoming me here. And any questions, I'd be more than happy to field them, either now or after we sit down for lunch. Thank you.